Don't wake him, or none of us walk out of this forest." The whisper barely carried through the cold night air, swallowed almost immediately by the towering pines that stretched endlessly into the dark sky above, their branches heavy and still, as if even the wind had decided to hold its breath. The moon hung low, pale and watchful, casting a thin silver glow across the clearing where he stood, or rather, where he barely managed to remain standing. Adrian Blackthorne. Even without a crown, even without a throne, his presence carved itself into the world like something ancient and unmovable, a force that didn't need to announce itself to be known. His coat, once pristine black, was streaked with dirt and torn along the shoulder, the fabric clinging damply to his skin, and though no one dared step too close, the air around him carried the sharp scent of iron and storm, thick enough to make lesser wolves lower their gaze. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. Every wolf gathered at the edge of the clearing felt it, the weight of him, the quiet promise of something uncontrollable coiled beneath the surface, something that had ended wars before they began. And yet, he swayed, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, a shift in balance that should not have existed in a man like him, a crack in something that had always seemed unbreakable. At the farthest edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a line of low shrubs, Lena Whitmore stood perfectly still, her hands clenched loosely at her sides, her breath shallow and quiet, as if she were afraid even the sound of it might draw attention. No one had told her to stay back. No one had needed to. Omegas like her learned early how to disappear, how to make themselves small enough that the world simply moved around them. They called her the ghost girl, not out of cruelty, not even out of intent, but because forgetting her had become second nature to everyone around her. And tonight was no different. No one noticed when she stepped forward. Not the guards watching with tight jaws and rigid shoulders, not the hunters gripping their weapons a little too tightly, and certainly not the high-ranking wolves murmuring in tense, hushed tones about what should be done if he lost control. Because that was the fear threading through the air, thick, electric, undeniable. Not whether he would wake, but what would happen when he did. Lena saw something else. She saw the way his fingers flexed slowly at his side, not in aggression, but in strain. She saw the faint tremor that ran through his shoulders, the kind that came not from anger, but from exhaustion pushed far past its limits. And then, without warning, his head dipped, just a fraction, and for a single, suspended moment, the most dangerous alpha alive looked human. It happened so quickly that most of them missed it. But Lena didn't. Her heart stuttered once, hard enough to echo in her chest, and before she could think, before she could measure the risk or listen to the distant voice of reason that had kept her safe her entire life, she moved. One step, then another, each one deliberate, quiet against the soft forest floor, closing the distance no one else dared cross. A murmur rippled through the watchers as someone finally noticed. What is she doing? But no one stopped her. No one dared. Because if she failed, if she drew his attention the wrong way, no one wanted to be close enough to share the consequence. Lena didn't look back. She didn't see their widened eyes or the way even the strongest among them shifted uneasily. All she saw was the man in front of her, standing too still for someone who should have been unstoppable. She stopped just within reach. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, not out of fear, but out of something quieter, something deeper. Then she lifted her hand, slowly, gently, and placed it against his shoulder. The contact was soft, almost nothing at all, but the world seemed to pause around it. Adrian's entire body went still. The air tightened. Every wolf in the clearing froze as if caught in a single, shared breath. And then, something impossible happened. The tension in his shoulders loosened, just enough to notice. His head tilted, slightly, toward her. And before anyone could understand, before anyone could react, the most feared alpha in existence leaned and let the weight of himself rest, quietly, against her shoulder. The world did not move. It did not breathe. It simply watched. Lena felt it first, not in the eyes on her, not in the silence pressing in from every direction, but in the subtle shift beneath her hand. Adrian's weight was real, solid, heavy in a way that grounded the moment into something undeniable. This was not illusion, not weakness mistaken for something else. His forehead rested just near her collarbone, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of his breath through the thin fabric of her sleeve. Slow, steady, alive. Her fingers tensed for a fraction of a second, instinct whispering that she should pull away, that she had crossed a line no one survived crossing. But she did not move. She could not. Because the moment her hand had touched him, something had changed. Not in him alone. In her. It was quiet, almost impossible to name, like a thread pulled taut between them, something unseen but undeniable, something that made her chest feel strangely lighter even as the weight of the entire clearing pressed against her back. Around them, the pack remained frozen, though now the silence carried a different edge. Confusion, disbelief, fear layered with something else no one wanted to say out loud. One of the guards shifted his stance, the leather of his boots scraping softly against the ground, the sound loud in the stillness. "This is wrong," someone whispered, barely audible, yet it cut through the air like a crack in glass. Another voice followed, tighter, uncertain. "He should not. He does not." No one finished the thought. No one dared define what they were seeing. Because to name it would mean accepting it. And accepting it would mean everything they believed about power, about dominance, about what made an alpha untouchable, was not as absolute as they thought. Lena swallowed slowly, her throat dry, her gaze fixed somewhere just beyond Adrian's shoulder. She could feel the rhythm of his breathing more clearly now, the rise and fall steadying, the tension that had coiled so tightly within him beginning to unravel in quiet increments. There was no aggression in him, no sign of the storm they had all feared, only exhaustion, deep, bone-heavy exhaustion, that seemed to settle further as the seconds passed, as if her presence gave it permission to surface. Her hand adjusted slightly against his shoulder, not pulling away, not tightening, simply finding a place where it felt natural to remain. The movement was small, almost nothing, but it drew a collective intake of breath from the watchers. To them, it must have looked like defiance, or madness, or both. To Lena, it felt like the only choice she had. Time stretched. It could have been seconds. It could have been minutes. No one moved to interrupt. Even those who held authority, who could have ordered her away, remained silent, as if some deeper instinct warned them that interfering now would shatter something fragile and irreversible. Then, from somewhere behind the line of observers, a low voice spoke, careful and measured. "If he wakes," the sentence lingered, unfinished, heavy with implication. Lena heard it. Of course she did. But the fear that should have followed did not come. Not in the way it used to. Because standing here, with the most feared alpha resting against her as if the world had finally allowed him to stop, she realized something that none of them had yet understood. He was not dangerous like this. He was not unpredictable. He was quiet. And in that quiet, there was a kind of truth no one had ever been close enough to witness. Her gaze lowered just slightly, enough to catch the faint shadow of his expression. The sharp lines of his face softened in a way that seemed almost impossible for someone like him. The tension in his jaw had eased. The rigid set of his shoulders had faded into something less guarded, less distant. For the first time since anyone here had ever seen him, Adrian Blackthorne looked unburdened. The realization settled into her chest, not as shock, but as something steady and certain. She did not know who he was to them beyond the stories, the warnings, the fear that followed his name like a shadow. But here, in this moment, he was simply a man who had nowhere else to rest. And for reasons she could not fully explain, he had chosen her. A branch shifted somewhere high above, a soft rustle breaking the stillness just enough to remind the world it had not completely stopped. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. Because now, it was no longer just fear holding them back. It was something far more unsettling. They were witnessing something they did not understand, something they could not control. And deep down, whether they admitted it or not, they knew this moment would change everything. No one told her to move, but Lena understood something the others did not say out loud. Stillness had a cost. The longer he remained like this, the more dangerous the moment became, not because of him, but because of them. Fear did not stay quiet forever. It shifted, it grew, it demanded action. And these wolves, no matter how disciplined they appeared, were still ruled by instinct. One wrong move, one raised voice, one attempt to interfere, and everything fragile in this silence would fracture. Lena felt it building at the edges of the clearing, the restless shifting of weight, the tightening of hands, the unspoken calculation passing between those who believed themselves responsible for control. Her fingers curled slightly against Adrian's shoulder, not gripping, not restraining, simply anchoring herself in the reality of him. His breathing remained steady, but deeper now, as if each breath drew him further away from the tension he had carried into this place. She could feel the heat of him more clearly, a contrast to the cool night air brushing against her skin, grounding and real in a way that made everything else seem distant. A faint sound broke the quiet, soft but deliberate. A step forward. Lena did not turn her head, but she felt the shift in attention, the way several gazes snapped toward the movement. "We cannot leave him like this," a voice said, low and controlled, but threaded with unease. "If he wakes disoriented, he is not disoriented." Another voice interrupted, sharper, though quieter, as if even disagreement feared to rise too high. "Look at him." There was a pause, a hesitation that stretched thin before snapping into reluctant acknowledgement. Because there was no denying what stood in front of them. Adrian Blackthorne was not struggling. He was not resisting. He was not preparing to strike. He was resting. The word itself felt foreign in this context, almost inappropriate for someone who had built his reputation on unrelenting strength. Lena shifted her weight just enough to steady herself, careful, slow, mindful of every inch of movement. His head followed the adjustment instinctively, settling more comfortably against her shoulder, and the reaction from the clearing was immediate. A ripple, not loud, not chaotic, but unmistakable. It moved through them like a current, subtle yet impossible to ignore. Someone exhaled too sharply. Someone else took a step back. The distance between her and the others widened, not by command, but by instinct. As if an invisible boundary had formed around them, one no one dared cross. Lena's pulse quickened for a brief moment, not out of panic, but awareness. This was no longer something they could dismiss. It was no longer an anomaly they could explain away. It was becoming something else, something that shifted the balance they all understood. She lowered her gaze slightly again, not enough to fully look at him, but enough to see the line of his profile, the way the tension had completely left his expression. There was no trace of the force they feared, no hint of the dominance that had defined him in every story she had ever heard. Just stillness, just quiet, just a man who, for reasons no one could explain, had chosen to trust her presence without question. The thought did not come with pride. It did not come with fear either. It came with something steadier. Responsibility. Because trust, especially from someone like him, was not a small thing. It was not something that could be taken lightly or misunderstood. It was something that could change the course of everything if it was broken. Another voice rose, softer this time, more cautious. What if she is the reason? The question lingered, uncertain but persistent. No one answered immediately. They did not need to. The answer was already forming in the silence between them. Lena felt it settle around her, the shift in perception, the recalculation of everything they thought they knew. She was no longer invisible. Not in this moment. Not to them. Not to him. And that realization carried weight far greater than the one resting against her shoulder. Somewhere deep in the forest, a distant call echoed faintly, carried on the wind before fading into nothing. Time was moving again. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. And when it did, when this moment finally broke, nothing would return to what it had been before. Because whether they accepted it or not, something had already changed. And it had started with her. The silence did not hold forever. It never did. It shifted first in the smallest ways, in the tightening of shoulders, in the way eyes no longer looked at Adrian alone, but flickered toward Lena with something sharper, something measuring. The clearing felt different now, no longer just a place of fear, but a place of imbalance, as if something unseen had tilted and no one knew how to set it right again. Lena felt it without needing to look. The weight of attention had changed direction. It pressed against her back, heavier than before, heavier than any whispered insult she had endured, heavier than years of being overlooked. This was not dismissal. This was recognition. And recognition, she realized, was far more dangerous. Adrian's breathing remained steady against her, each slow inhale and exhale a quiet anchor in the growing tension around them. The warmth of him had deepened, no longer just a contrast to the night air, but something that seemed to settle into her, steadying her in a way she had never experienced before. It was unfamiliar. It was unsettling. But she did not pull away. She could not. Because pulling away now would mean breaking something that had formed without words, something that existed in the space between trust and instinct. A figure stepped forward from the line of watchers, slower than before, more deliberate, as if careful movement alone could avoid provoking what they did not understand. He did not come too close. No one did. But his voice carried, low and controlled, shaped by authority even in uncertainty. Omega, he said, not unkindly, but not gently either. The word itself felt different in the air, no longer dismissive, but weighted. Lena did not respond. Immediately. Not because she refused, but because she understood that any movement, any reaction, would draw attention back to the fragile center of this moment. Instead, she let her hand remain where it was, steady against Adrian's shoulder, her posture unchanged. The man hesitated, then tried again, more carefully. You need to step back. The request was measured, but it was still a request built on assumption, on control, on the belief that this could be returned to something familiar if only she obeyed. Lena's gaze lowered slightly, her focus drawn once more to the man resting against her, to the quiet truth of his stillness. If she stepped back, what would happen? Would he wake to a world that feared him again? Would the tension return all at once, sharp and immediate, undoing whatever fragile peace had settled here? She did not know, but she knew what this moment felt like, and she knew it mattered. No, she said softly. The word barely rose above a whisper, but in the silence, it carried farther than any shout. The reaction was immediate. A ripple of shock moved through the clearing, sharper than before, more defined. Not because she had spoken loudly, but because she had spoken at all. Lena Whitmore did not refuse. Lena Whitmore did not draw lines. Lena Whitmore did not become the center of anything. And yet here she was, standing in front of them all, holding a boundary no one had expected her to claim. The man stiffened slightly, his expression tightening, though he did not step closer. You do not understand the risk, he said, quieter now, but firmer. If he wakes, Lena's fingers shifted again, just slightly, a gentle adjustment that drew Adrian closer by a fraction, his weight settling more naturally against her, as if her presence alone guided him there. The movement cut through the man's words before he could finish. Because again, the response was immediate. Adrian did not pull away. He did not react with force or instinct or dominance. He leaned into it. The clearing fell silent once more, but this time, it was not confusion that filled it. It was something deeper, something harder to deny. Lena lifted her gaze just enough to meet the man's eyes, not challengingly, not defiantly, but steadily. He is not the risk, she said, her voice calm, even, carrying a certainty that did not match the quiet girl they thought they knew. The words settled into the air, heavy and undeniable. No one answered. No one corrected her, because they had all seen it. They had all felt it. And somewhere, beneath the fear and the uncertainty and the shifting balance of everything they thought they understood, a new realization was beginning to take shape. The danger they had always prepared for was not standing in front of them. It was everything they had yet to understand about this moment. And for the first time, no one knew what to do next. The word she had spoken did not fade. It settled. It stayed. It lingered in the air between them like something that could not be taken back, something that demanded to be acknowledged whether they wanted to or not. Lena could feel it in the way the clearing had shifted, in the way no one rushed to speak over her. No one dismissed her as they once would have without a second thought. Silence, she realized, was no longer something imposed on her. It was something chosen around her. Adrian's breathing deepened again, slower now, more grounded, the rise and fall of his chest steady against her shoulder, as if her presence had become the rhythm his body followed. The tension that had once defined him seemed distant, almost unreal compared to the quiet weight he carried now. It did not make sense. Not to them, not to the stories. But Lena was not listening to stories anymore. She was listening to what was real. A faint movement drew her attention to the side. Not forward, not threatening, but closer than before. Another wolf had stepped nearer, though still keeping distance, his posture careful, his expression harder to read. He was not looking at Adrian this time. He was looking at her, measuring, calculating. This changes nothing, he said, his voice controlled, though the certainty in it felt thinner than he intended. He is still who he is. Lena did not respond immediately. Her gaze lowered again, not in submission, but in quiet thought. Still who he is. The words echoed, but they did not land the way he expected, because what she felt now did not match the shape of those words. The man resting against her was not a title, not a threat, not a legend whispered in fear. He was breathing. He was still. He was here. And who is that? She asked softly. The question was not sharp. It was not defiant, but it cut deeper than anything louder could have. The wolf hesitated, just for a second, but that second was enough. Enough for doubt to slip in where certainty had once been. Enough for the others to notice. No one answered her, not because they did not have words, but because the words they had no longer felt complete. The version of Adrian they understood did not include this. It did not include quiet. It did not include trust given without demand or dominance. And yet here it was, undeniable in front of them. Lena felt a subtle shift again beneath her hand, not sudden, not alarming, but different. A small adjustment, almost instinctive. Adrian's head tilted slightly, his weight redistributing as if searching for a more natural place to rest, his shoulder brushing closer to her arm. Her breath caught for the briefest moment, not out of fear, but awareness. He was not waking, but he was not completely unaware either. Some part of him responded. Some part of him recognized. The realization settled quietly into her chest. He knew she was there. Not consciously, not fully, but enough. Enough to stay. Enough to remain. A murmur stirred through the clearing again, softer now, less sharp, but filled with something far more unsettling than fear. Uncertainty. Because this was no longer a moment they could dismiss or contain. It was stretching, deepening, becoming something that demanded understanding. And understanding was not something they could reach quickly. This cannot continue, someone said from the back, though the voice lacked the force it once would have carried. It sounded less like an order now, more like a plea for things to return to what they had been. But nothing about this felt temporary anymore. Lena shifted her stance slightly, careful and controlled, adjusting to the steady weight against her without breaking the contact that had anchored him here. Her hand remained where it was, her fingers relaxed, her presence unchanged. She did not need to speak again. Not yet. Because the truth of this moment was already unfolding without her words. Adrian Blackthorne, the man they had feared without question, was not reacting to authority. He was not responding to command. He was not restrained by force. He was choosing stillness. And that choice, quiet as it was, carried more power than anything they had prepared for. Lena lifted her gaze slowly, letting it pass over the faces watching her now, no longer invisible, no longer overlooked. They were waiting, not for him, for her. And for the first time in her life, she understood something with absolute clarity. This moment did not belong to fear. It belonged to what came after, and none of them were ready for that. The air did not return to normal. It thickened instead, not with fear alone, but with anticipation that had nowhere to go. Lena could feel it pressing in from every direction, a quiet demand for something to happen, for the moment to resolve into something they could understand. But nothing resolved. Nothing broke. Adrian remained exactly where he was, his weight steady, his presence no longer overwhelming the space but reshaping it in a way none of them could ignore. The longer it lasted, the more unnatural it became to everyone except her. Lena adjusted her breathing slowly, matching the rhythm she felt against her shoulder, letting it guide her instead of the restless energy gathering behind her. It was the only thing that made sense now. Not the voices, not the shifting stances, not the quiet tension of wolves who did not know whether to step forward or stay back. Only this. Only him. A faint breeze moved through the clearing, stirring the edges of her hair, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, grounding the moment in something real and physical. For a second, it almost felt ordinary. Almost. Until a sharper voice broke through again, this time closer, less cautious. You are interfering with something you do not understand. Lena did not turn, but she recognized the tone. Authority sharpened by discomfort. The kind that did not. Like uncertainty, and tried to cover it with control. Step away, the voice continued, firmer now. That is not your place. Not your place. The words landed differently now than they would have before. Before, they would have been enough to send her retreating without question, to remind her of every invisible boundary she had been taught not to cross. But those boundaries did not feel real anymore. Not with Adrian leaning against her, as if the world had narrowed down to this single point of contact. Lena's fingers shifted again, lightly, brushing against the fabric of his coat in a small, grounding motion. She felt it immediately. A response. Not conscious, not deliberate, but real. His breathing changed by a fraction, a subtle deepening, as if her presence anchored him further instead of disturbing him. The reaction did not go unnoticed. A quiet ripple moved through the watchers again, more intense this time, harder to ignore. Because this was no longer a single occurrence. It was a pattern, a connection forming in front of them without permission, without explanation. Lena lifted her gaze slowly, though she still did not fully turn. "He already decided where I belong," she said quietly. The words were simple, calm, but they carried a weight that settled over the clearing like something irreversible. A few of them shifted back instinctively, not because she raised her voice, but because something in the way she said it left no room for dismissal. Adrian did not react outwardly, but the stillness in him deepened, as if the truth in her words resonated in a place beyond conscious thought. The one who had spoken earlier stepped closer now, not aggressively, but with a tension that betrayed how little control he truly felt. "You are making a mistake," he said, lower now, as if trying to keep the moment contained. "When he wakes, he will not remember this. He will not." His words faltered, not because he lacked conviction, but because he lacked certainty. Because nothing about this followed what he understood. Lena finally turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. There was no defiance in her expression, no anger, only a quiet steadiness that had not existed before tonight. "Then why is he still here?" she asked. The question was soft, almost gentle, but it unraveled something the moment it was spoken. Because there was no answer. If this was instinct, it would have passed. If this was weakness, it would have broken. If this was danger, it would have already shown itself. But none of those things had happened. Adrian remained. Not because he had to, but because something in him chose to. The realization moved through the clearing like a slow wave, changing the way they stood, the way they watched, the way they thought. This was not something they could control. Not with orders. Not with force. Lena felt the shift settle around her. Not chaotic, not explosive, but certain. The moment had crossed into something else entirely. Something that did not belong to the rules they had lived by. And as she stood there, unmoving, with the most powerful alpha resting quietly against her, she understood something none of them were ready to admit. This was not a disruption. This was a beginning. The word beginning lingered in her mind, not as a thought she chose, but as something that had already taken root without permission. Lena did not move, but she felt the shift happen around her in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of change that slipped beneath the surface and rewrote the rules before anyone realized they were different. The wolves who had once stood ready, tense with expectation, no longer looked as though they were waiting for something to break. They looked as though they were waiting to understand. That alone was enough to unsettle everything they believed in. Adrian's weight remained steady against her, but there was something new beneath it now. Not tension, not instability, something quieter, something that felt almost intentional. His breathing shifted again, just slightly, but this time the change did not feel like rest alone. It felt aware. Lena felt it through the contact between them, through the subtle way his shoulder adjusted, the way his balance no longer leaned entirely into her, but shared the space between standing and resting. Her fingers, stilled where they rested against him, not pulling away, not pressing closer, simply present. She did not speak. She did not need to, because something was changing again. And this time, it was him. A soft exhale left him, deeper than before, and the movement that followed was small but unmistakable. His head lifted. Not fully, not quickly, just enough to break the complete stillness that had held him there. The reaction from the clearing was immediate. Not chaos, not panic, but a tightening of attention so sharp it felt like the air itself had drawn inward. Every eye fixed on him, every breath held. Lena did not step back. She did not retreat. Even as his weight shifted, even as the contact changed, she remained where she was, steady in a way she had never been before. Because running now would mean undoing everything that had happened. And something told her that this moment could not be undone. Adrian's head did not move far. It tilted slightly, as if orienting, as if finding something familiar in a place that should not have been. His eyes remained closed, but the stillness was different now. It was no longer absence. It was presence held just beneath the surface. Lena felt it in the way his breathing no longer deepened into sleep, but steadied into something alert without fully waking. He knew. Not consciously, not clearly, but enough. Enough to stay where he was instead of pulling away. Enough to remain in the space she held for him. A quiet murmur rose behind her, barely contained. He is waking. The words were careful, almost cautious, as if saying them too loudly might change the outcome. Another voice followed, tighter, edged with something close to disbelief. Then why has he not moved? No one answered. Because there was no answer that fit what they were seeing. Lena felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from awareness. This was the edge of something. The point where everything could shift again, where the fragile balance they had reached could either break or become something stronger. Her hand moved, just slightly, a soft adjustment against his shoulder, grounding, steady. The same motion she had made before. The same quiet contact that had drawn him into stillness. Adrian's response was immediate. Subtle, but undeniable. His breath steadied again. The faint tension that had begun to return easing almost as quickly as it had appeared. His head lowered once more, not falling, not collapsing, but choosing that position again as if it was the only place that made sense. The clearing went silent. Not the uncertain silence from before. Not the tense, waiting silence. This was different. This was realization. Because now they had seen it happen twice. This was not an accident. This was not coincidence. This was something real. Lena felt it settle around her, not as pressure this time, but as a shift in understanding that no one could ignore. Adrian Blackthorne was not reacting to fear. He was not responding to authority. He was responding to her. The truth of it moved through the clearing slowly, deeply, impossible to deny now that it had been witnessed more than once. Lena did not look at them. She did not need to. She already knew what they were seeing, what they were beginning to understand. And as she stood there, unmoving, with the most powerful alpha in existence choosing her presence over everything else around him, she realized something that changed everything. This was no longer about survival. This was no longer about avoiding danger. This was something far more dangerous than either of those things. This was connection. And once it existed, it could not simply be undone. The forest did not feel the same anymore. It was not just quieter, it was aware, as if every branch, every leaf, every shadow had leaned in to witness something that should not exist, but now undeniably did. Lena felt it in the way the air rested differently against her skin, no longer cold and distant, but charged with something subtle and electric, something that had no name yet, but demanded to be felt. Adrian's weight remained against her, but it was no longer the same kind of stillness. There was awareness in it now, quiet but present, like a current running just beneath the surface of calm water. She did not move. She did not speak. She only breathed, slow and steady, allowing the rhythm between them to hold. Because now, she understood something that none of the others had fully grasped yet. If she broke the rhythm, everything would change. A faint sound shifted through the clearing, not from him, but from them. Someone stepped forward again, slower this time, more careful, as if even intention had to be softened to exist here. This cannot be natural, the voice said, quieter than before, but no less certain in its attempt to hold onto control. There has to be a reason. A reason. Lena felt the words settle somewhere deep, not as pressure, but as something almost distant. Because what she felt now did not need explanation. It simply was. Adrian's breathing shifted again, not deeper, not heavier, but sharper for a brief moment, as if something brushed against his awareness from within. His head lifted again, slightly more this time than before. Not enough to fully separate from her, but enough that the warmth of his breath no longer rested against the same place. The change was immediate. The clearing tightened. Every gaze sharpened. Every instinct leaned forward. Lena felt it too. The edge of the moment. The point where everything could break if it was pushed too far. Her hand moved again, instinctively this time, not thought through, not calculated. Gentle, steady. Her fingers brushed slightly higher along his shoulder, a quiet reassurance rather than restraint. It is all right, she said softly, the words barely more than a breath, not meant for anyone else. Not meant for the clearing, only for him. The effect was immediate, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but undeniable. Adrian's breath steadied again, the brief sharpness fading as quickly as it had come. His head lowered once more, not fully resting as before, but settling into a balance that felt chosen, not forced, not accidental. Chosen. The reaction from the others was different this time. There was no murmur, no immediate whisper, just silence that stretched longer, deeper, heavier. Because now it was no longer just something they witnessed. It was something they understood enough to fear differently. Lena felt it shift around her, the weight of perception changing once more. This was no longer about whether he was dangerous. It was about why he was not. And the answer stood in the center of it all. Her. A slow step came from behind the line again, more deliberate than before. Not rushed, not uncertain. Someone who had made a decision. Lena did not turn, but she felt the difference in presence. Older, stronger, not louder, but heavier in a way that carried authority without needing to demand it. Enough, the voice said quietly. It was not sharp. It was not aggressive, but it carried something final within it. The clearing responded instantly, not with movement, but with attention. The others listened, waited. The man stepped forward just enough to be seen clearly now, though he still kept his distance. His gaze did not go to Adrian first. It went to Lena, and there was no dismissal in it. No doubt, only careful consideration. You will not move, he said. It was not a question. It was not even an order in the way the others had tried. It was a recognition of what already was. Lena did not respond. She did not need to, because she had not planned to move anyway. The man's gaze shifted then, slowly, toward Adrian, studying him in a way the others had not dared to. Not looking for threat, not looking for control, looking for truth. And after a moment, he spoke again, quieter this time. And he will not be taken from where he chose to rest. The words settled into the clearing like something that could not be undone, something that redefined the moment completely. Lena felt it, the shift from uncertainty into something closer to acceptance. Not full understanding, not yet, but the beginning of it. Adrian remained where he was, steady, grounded, present in a way that no longer felt fragile. And Lena, standing beneath the weight of everything that had changed, realized something with quiet certainty. This was no longer something that needed to be protected. This was something that had already claimed its place in the world. And no one here could take that away. The word enough did not end the moment. It defined it. Lena felt it settle into the clearing like a line drawn not in force, but in certainty. And for the first time since she had stepped forward, the pressure around her shifted into something steadier. The restless tension that had been building began to recede, not completely, but enough that it no longer felt like it would fracture the silence at any second. Adrian's presence remained unchanged against her, but there was something deeper in it now, something more anchored, as if the acknowledgement from the man who had spoken had reinforced the space he had already chosen. Lena's hand stayed where it was, her fingers relaxed but aware, her touch no longer hesitant, no longer questioning. It had become natural. That realization surprised her more than anything else. Because nothing about this night should have felt natural. A faint shift moved through Adrian again, not sudden, not sharp, but more pronounced than before. His shoulders straightened slightly beneath her hand, not pulling away, but redistributing his weight with a quiet strength that had not been present earlier. The change was subtle, but undeniable. He was not as far from waking now. The clearing felt it immediately. A tightening, but not the same kind as before. This was not fear rushing in. This was anticipation. A different kind of waiting. Lena felt her breath slow deliberately, grounding herself again in the rhythm that had carried them this far. She did not pull her hand back. She did not step away, because something told her that if she did, this moment would not end gently. It would snap, and she was no longer willing to let that happen. A low voice spoke from the side, quieter than before, but edged with unease that had not fully faded. If he wakes and sees this. The sentence did not finish, but it did not need to. The meaning was clear. The expectation was clear. That the moment would break. That he would pull away. That whatever connection had formed would dissolve the second awareness fully returned. Lena heard it. She understood it. But she did not believe it. Not anymore. Because she had already seen something they had not expected. Not once, but more than once. Adrian's head lifted again, this time slowly enough that the movement felt intentional rather than instinctive. The warmth of his breath shifted away from her shoulder, replaced by the faint coolness of the night air. His posture straightened slightly, though not fully, as if he hovered between rest and awareness, caught in a space that did not belong entirely to either. Lena felt the change immediately, the absence of that steady weight both lighter and heavier at once. But she did not step back. She remained exactly where she was, her hand still resting against him, her presence unchanged. Because something told her this was not the moment to retreat. This was the moment to remain. His eyes did not open. Not yet. But his breathing had changed. It was no longer the deep, unguarded rhythm of rest. It was controlled, measured, aware. And still, he did not move away from her. The realization moved through the clearing like a slow, undeniable current. The expectation that had been waiting to take hold began to unravel. Because this was not what they had prepared for. This was not what they understood. Lena's fingers shifted again, lightly, a small grounding motion that had become instinctive now. Not to hold him, not to keep him there, just to remind him, in whatever quiet way he could feel, that she had not changed, that she was still here. Adrian's response came in the smallest of ways, but it was enough. His shoulders eased again, not fully relaxing, but settling into a balance that did not reject her presence, did not resist it, did not question it. The clearing held its breath, because now the moment had crossed into something irreversible. He was no longer unaware. And still, he had not pulled away. Lena felt it settle into her chest, not as shock, not as fear, but as something steady and certain. Whatever this was, whatever had formed between them in the quiet of this night, it was not fragile. It was not temporary. It was something that held even when awareness returned. And that changed everything. The man who had spoken earlier remained still, watching, not intervening, not commanding, observing, learning. And the others followed his lead, no longer stepping forward, no longer trying to control what they could not understand. Lena did not look at them. She did not need to, because the truth of this moment no longer depended on their reactions. It existed on its own now, independent, unshaken. And as Adrian remained beside her, not fully resting, not fully awake, but choosing not to leave, Lena understood something that none of them had yet put into words. This was not a moment that would fade when the night ended. This was something that would follow them into whatever came next. And none of them were prepared for what that meant. The moment did not shatter when awareness returned. It deepened. Lena felt it in the subtle shift beneath her hand, in the way Adrian's posture no longer hovered uncertainly between rest and waking, but settled into something deliberate, something controlled. His breathing had changed completely now. It was no longer the unguarded rhythm she had followed before, but neither was it sharp or defensive. It was measured, intentional, a quiet balance that spoke of a man who knew exactly where he was, even without opening his eyes. The realization sent a quiet ripple through her chest, not fear, not panic, but something steadier. He was aware, fully aware, and still, he had not moved away. Around them, the clearing seemed to tighten again, but differently than before. Not with confusion, not with uncertainty. This was expectation, sharpened and focused, waiting for the moment everything would snap back into place, waiting for him to pull away, to reclaim the distance that defined him, to restore the order they understood. Lena did not move. Her hand remained where it was, her fingers resting lightly against the fabric of his coat, not gripping, not holding, simply present. Because something told her that if she reacted first, if she stepped back before he chose to, she would be the one breaking something that had taken shape beyond either of their intentions. A breath passed between them. Quiet, close, real. Then Adrian moved. Slowly, deliberately. His head lifted from her shoulder, not abruptly, not with tension, but with a controlled ease that carried none of the urgency the others expected. The absence of his weight was immediate, noticeable in a way that felt larger than the movement itself. Lena felt it, the space where he had been, the quiet shift of airware. Warmth had lingered just seconds before, but she did not retreat. She did not step back. She remained where she was, her hand lowering only slightly as the contact changed, her presence steady. Adrian straightened fully now, his height returning, his posture aligning into something unmistakably powerful once again. But it was not the same as before. The force was there, undeniable, but it was quieter, contained in a way that had not existed when he first stood in the clearing. His eyes opened. The reaction was instant. Not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. Every wolf present felt it, the weight of that gaze returning to the world, sharp and clear and fully aware. But he did not look at them. Not first. His gaze settled on Lena. Direct, focused, unbroken. The clearing held its breath. Because this was the moment everything was supposed to correct itself. This was where the distance should reappear, where the imbalance should resolve, where she should step back, where he should step away, where everything should return to the lines they understood. But it did not happen. Lena met his gaze without flinching, without lowering her eyes, without retreating into the small, invisible space she had always occupied before tonight. Not out of defiance, not out of challenge, but because something in this moment did not feel like something she needed to survive. It felt like something she needed to stand in. Adrian's expression did not shift dramatically. It did not harden. It did not soften in any obvious way. But something in his eyes changed. Something that did not belong to dominance or authority or control. Something quieter. Something that recognized. His gaze flickered briefly, not away, but across her, taking in the small details that no one had ever paid attention to before. The steadiness of her posture. The calm in her breathing. The absence of fear where fear should have been. The clearing remained silent, waiting, watching, expecting the next move to define everything. Adrian did not speak immediately. He did not turn away. He did not reclaim the distance they all expected him to enforce. Instead, his voice came low and steady, carrying clearly without effort. You did not move. The words were simple, not an accusation, not a question, a statement. Lena felt them settle into her chest, not as pressure, but as something grounding. She did not look away. No, she answered quietly. The exchange was small, almost nothing, but it shifted the entire clearing. Because this was not dominance. This was not command. This was something else entirely. Adrian's gaze held hers for a moment longer, measuring, understanding in a way that did not rely on the rules the others followed. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned. Not away from her completely, but enough to acknowledge the others watching. And when he spoke again, his voice carried something that none of them had expected. Not warning, not threat, certainty. No one touches her. The words settled into the clearing with absolute clarity. No hesitation, no room for interpretation. And in that moment, everything changed. Not because he had claimed control, but because he had chosen a side. And it was not the one they expected. The words did not echo. They did not need to. They settled into the clearing with a finality that carried far beyond their simplicity, pressing into every wolf present with the weight of something absolute. Lena felt it immediately, not just in the silence that followed, but in the shift of space around her, in the way no one stood quite as close as they had before, in the way even the air seemed to respect the boundary that had just been drawn. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not repeat himself. He did not need to. The certainty in his tone had already done what force never could. Lena remained where she was, her posture steady, though her awareness sharpened with every passing second. The moment had changed again, but this time it was no longer fragile. It was defined, and that definition came from him. Adrian's gaze did not return to her immediately. It lingered outward, sweeping across the clearing with quiet precision, not searching, not threatening, but acknowledging. Every wolf felt it. The weight of being seen, the weight of being measured, and one by one, they responded without being told, subtle shifts in stance, in breath, in presence. As if something deep within them recognized the line that had just been drawn and chose not to cross it. No one argued. No one challenged him. That, more than anything, revealed the truth of his authority. It did not need to be enforced. It existed. Lena felt her breath settle again, slower now, steadier, though her pulse had not fully quieted. She had never stood at the center of anything like this before, never been the point around which everything else adjusted. It should have felt overwhelming. It should have made her retreat, but it did not, because something in her had already shifted long before his words, something that no longer fit the version of herself she had been before tonight. Adrian turned back to her then, his gaze returning not with the distant intensity it held for the others, but with something more focused, more deliberate. He studied her in silence, not quickly, not dismissively, but with attention that felt precise, as if he were seeing her fully for the first time. Lena did not look away. She could feel the weight of that gaze, but it did not push her down. It did not force her smaller. It held her where she stood, You stayed, he said again, quieter this time, as if the words carried a different meaning now that everything else had been spoken. Lena's fingers, which had lowered slightly when he stepped back, stilled at her side. The absence of contact was still there, noticeable in a way that surprised her, but it did not pull her off balance. Yes, she answered, just as quietly. There was no elaboration, no justification. The truth did not need either. Adrian's expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes shifted again, something that did not belong to authority or expectation, something that recognized a choice made without demand, a presence held without fear. He took a single step, not away, not toward the others, but slightly closer to her again, though not enough to touch. The distance between them was small now, but intentional, measured. Lena felt it, the space between them no longer empty, but filled with something unspoken, something that neither of them rushed to define. Around them, the clearing remained. Silent, but it was no longer the same kind of silence. It was not tension waiting to break. It was a tension waiting to understand. The man who had spoken earlier, the one who had said enough, remained still, watching with a focus that had shifted from control to observation. He did not interrupt. He did not question, because something told him this moment did not belong to him. It belonged to what was unfolding between the two standing at its center. Adrian's gaze did not leave Lena's. You were not afraid, he said, not as a question, but as a quiet acknowledgement of something that stood out against everything he knew. Lena felt the words settle into her, and for a moment, she considered them, not as a statement to accept or deny, but as something to understand. I was, she said softly. The answer was simple, honest. It did not try to reshape the truth. It held it. Adrian did not react immediately, but something in his expression changed again, not dramatically, not visibly to everyone else, but enough that the space between them shifted once more, because fear had not driven her away, and that mattered more than the absence of it. A faint breeze moved through the clearing again, softer now, carrying the scent of the forest, grounding the moment back into something real, something physical. But nothing about this felt ordinary anymore. Lena stood where she was, no longer invisible, no longer overlooked, no longer defined by what she lacked. And Adrian, the one who had once stood apart from everything and everyone, remained within reach, not by force, not by obligation, but by choice. And as the silence held, not fragile, not uncertain, but steady, something deeper began to take shape. Not a command, not a bond named or claimed, but something quieter, something that did not need to be spoken yet to exist. And everyone present felt it, even if they could not yet understand what it meant. The silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt full, layered with something unspoken that settled into every corner of the clearing, into every breath that moved through it, into every pair of eyes that refused to look away. Lena stood within it, not at the edge of something uncertain, but at the center of something that had already taken shape whether anyone understood it or not. Adrian remained in front of her, close enough that the space between them still held the warmth of what had been there before, the memory of contact that had not truly faded. He did not step back. He did not create distance. And that alone was enough to hold the attention of everyone watching. His gaze stayed on her, steady, unbroken, not searching anymore, not questioning in the way it had before. It had changed. There was recognition in it now, not of who she had been in their world, but of what she had done in this moment, of what she had chosen. Lena felt it settle into her chest, not overwhelming, not heavy, but grounding. For the first time, being seen did not feel like something she had to endure. It felt like something she could stand within without shrinking. A quiet shift moved through the clearing again, but no one stepped forward this time. No one interrupted. Even the ones who had spoken earlier remained silent, their presence no longer pushing against the moment, but adjusting around it. The man who had declared enough watched carefully, his expression unreadable, but his stillness carried something different now. Acceptance was not the right word, but resistance had faded. Adrian's voice came again, lower this time, meant only for the space between them, though everyone heard it anyway. You should not have been here. The words were not harsh. They were not dismissive. They carried something quieter, something that felt closer to truth than judgment. Lena considered them, not defensively, not with the instinct to explain, but with a clarity that had only come to her since this moment began. I was, she answered simply. The response did not argue his statement. It existed beside it. Because both things could be true. Adrian's gaze held hers, and for a brief second, something shifted behind it. Something deeper than authority, deeper than expectation. Something that acknowledged the difference between what should have been and what was. He exhaled slowly, the sound soft but deliberate, as if releasing something that had not had space to exist. Before, the forest seemed to follow that breath, the tension easing in small, almost imperceptible ways. The night felt wider again, but the moment did not lose its shape. It did not dissolve back into something ordinary. It remained. Adrian's attention moved then, not away from her entirely, but outward again, toward the clearing that still watched, still waited, still tried to understand what they had witnessed. His posture did not harden. It did not return to the rigid, distant form they expected. It remained grounded, controlled, but quieter. And when he spoke, his voice carried not just command, but something that reshaped the moment further. She stays. The words were simple, but they did more than the ones before. Because this was not just protection. This was placement. This was decision. A subtle shift moved through the wolves again, but no one objected. No one stepped forward. Because the boundary had already been set, and now it had been reinforced in a different way. Not as something temporary, as something that would continue beyond this night. Lena felt it settle around her, not as pressure, but as something steady. Something that did not ask her to shrink or disappear. Something that allowed her to exist exactly where she stood. She did not move. She did not question it. Because something in her understood that this moment was not something she had been placed into by accident. It was something she had stepped into. And now, it was hers to stand within. Adrian's gaze returned to her once more, not sharp, not distant, but present. The space between them held something new now, something that had not been there before the silence, before the stillness, before the choice that neither of them had planned. Lena felt it, not as something overwhelming, but as something quiet and certain, something that did not need to be named to exist. The forest remained still around them, the night stretching on, no longer heavy with fear, but filled with something else entirely. Something that had replaced it. Something that would not fade when the sun rose. And as Lena stood there, no longer invisible, no longer overlooked, she realized something that settled into her with complete clarity. This moment had not just changed how they saw her. It had changed where she stood in the world. And nothing would return to what it had been before. The night did not end with noise or movement. It ended with stillness that felt intentional, as if the world itself had decided to pause long enough for something irreversible to take root. Lena stood where she had been told she could remain, but it no longer felt like permission. It felt like truth. The space around her did not close in again. No one stepped forward. No one questioned what had already been decided. Because something deeper than authority had settled into the clearing, something that could not be undone by doubt or explained away by reason. Adrian remained near her, not touching, not holding her there, but not leaving either. His presence was steady, grounded in a way that no longer carried the sharp edge of distance. It was still powerful. It was still undeniable. But it had changed. It no longer stood apart from her. It existed beside her. The difference was subtle, but every wolf present felt it. Lena's breathing slowed again, fully settled now, her body no longer braced for something to break. The tension that had once defined her existence within the pack had nowhere to return. Because the place she stood in now was not the same place she had always been forced into. It had shifted, completely. A faint sound of wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the distant promise of dawn not yet visible, but approaching. Time had not stopped after all. It had only bent long enough for this moment to form. Adrian turned slightly, not away from her, but outward, his gaze sweeping across the clearing once more. This time, there was no tension behind it. No warning. Just clarity. And something else beneath it that none of them had ever seen directed toward another wolf before. Restraint. Not because he needed to hold back, but because he chose to. The man who had spoken earlier remained still, his posture no longer rigid, his authority no longer pushing against the moment. He inclined his head just slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. Others followed, slower, more uncertain, but they did. One by one, subtle shifts in posture, in gaze, in presence, each one small, each one quiet, but together forming something undeniable. Recognition, not of her past, not of her rank, but of what had just occurred. Lena felt it settle into her without overwhelming her, without forcing her to react. She did not lower her head. She did not step back. She simply remained. Adrian's attention returned to her once more, quieter now, not searching, not measuring, but certain. The silence between them no longer felt like something waiting to be filled. It felt complete as it was. He did not reach for her. He did not need to. The absence of distance spoke louder than any touch could have. "This does not change what you are," a voice said from the edge of the clearing, hesitant, uncertain, holding onto the last thread of the world they understood. The words hung there, fragile, almost pleading to be true. Lena heard them. She felt them. And for a moment, she looked past Adrian, past the space they shared, toward the one who had spoken. Not with anger, not with defiance, but with something far steadier. "No," she said quietly. The answer was simple, honest, unshaken. Adrian did not look away from her. "It reveals it," he said.